right, hey, good afternoon, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Sunday, June 16th, 2024. This is your afternoon video tropical update, where we do have a quickly awakening Atlantic basin on our hands. We have two areas of interest we're watching here today. Last time we chatted, we did talk about our area in the southern Gulf of Mexico, scheduled to get formed up here in a couple of days and move towards the coast of Mexico and possibly South Texas. But a new player has entered the ring. We also have an area of low pressure quickly developing south of Bermuda, and this is actually going to wind up moving towards Florida in the extended term, and by late week, some impacts possible to Florida or maybe the southeast coast. Parts of Georgia and South Carolina may also be on some direct impacts from that system. So those are the two things we're watching here this afternoon. Rest of the basin largely quiet. In the extended outlook, we have some potential for more development in the Western Caribbean as the flow continues into the Gulf into the late month, but that's kind of off and on the models right now. But we do have these two areas of interest that we're definitely tracking. So we are going to start with our area in red down here. After an update from the National Hurricane Center, 70% chance of development through the next 7 days. This large area of disturbed weather is likely to develop over the southern Gulf of Mexico. Heavy rainfall falling right now in Mexico, and then that's going to spread northward and possibly into the western Gulf Coast as well. Hurricane Center fairly high on the development odds, and then we're going to cover that, and then we'll come back to the Florida Invest after that. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this system because the U.S. impacts are only marginal right now. We do have this broad area of low pressure developing this afternoon. No closed circulation yet. You can see the background flow is quickly switched. So for days last week, we had a strong high pressure over the Gulf Coast blocking all the tropical moisture, so it was being forced back over Florida, and that's where we had those days and days of just brutally heavy rainfall across Florida, where 25, maybe even 30 inches of rain fell in parts of southeast, southwest sort of Florida. But you can look at the map today, and you can see this trough now moving offshore. As this moves away, a high pressure now moves off the shore behind it, and then all the flow begins to reverse, and now your flow is pushing all this moisture back to the west and northwest. This is going to send all that tropical moisture, that fire hose, reverting back from Florida back towards the Gulf Coast. And as that happens, the background winds are going to push this along. You have this broad area of low pressure already circulating in the broad sense. And then as that does, you're going to likely have a smaller low develop inside of here off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. And then all this is going to kind of lurch in a big mess towards parts of northern Mexico and southern Texas over the week ahead. So GFS model kind of shows us on the 700 to 300 millibar relative humidity chart here on Tropical Tidbits. We have basically this big spinning area down here by the Yucatan. You can see a low pressure tries to start forming sometime around Tuesday. That sounds about right, maybe late Monday night, early Tuesday. Again, broad cyclonic flow here, but then a smaller low. Again, that analogy from the other day of the teacup ride where the whole platform spins, but then you've got something spinning inside of it. Same sort of idea. This is not showing a ton of development, though. The low is not very low, maybe 1,002 millibars. This isn't a strong, organized tropical system by any stretch, but you can see that column of deep tropical moisture surging into parts of Louisiana, Mississippi. And as we go into Wednesday, Thursday, that begins to point towards Texas, so this heavy rain shifting further west. GFS does eventually stamp the low there, but it's very misaligned from the mid-level flow. So again, not expecting a very strong storm, but of some strength. But it is going to be over very warm water and not moving terribly fast. So if it has any kind of window with the wind shear and whatnot, it does have some opportunity to develop before moving inland. And right now, models continue to indicate some landfall near northern Mexico's coast, or possibly South Texas, Brownsville, maybe even as far north as, say, Corpus Christi would probably be your goalpost here. I don't think this gets much further north. This strong high pressure over the southeast U.S. is not going to let that get much further north. But again, even though the low, the storm, quote unquote, is down here, this swath of tropical moisture is going to bring some very heavy rain to the Gulf Coast. You're seeing isolated amounts up to a foot of rain in the next 7 days coming from parts of the Texas coastline. This is Houston, Galveston, and then other amounts, 4 to 6 inches across Louisiana, even as far to the east as Mississippi and Alabama getting in on several inches of rain in the week ahead. So something we are going to have to watch. But again, right now, although this is likely going to be our first named storm of the season, which will be Alberto, U.S. impacts outside of heavy rainfall not looking all that likely. So let's go ahead and turn our attention to the southwest Atlantic, where we do have our little area of low pressure trying to develop today. So this is the pattern that is quickly changing. Big high starting to build in over the southeast and a trough off the coast here, all this moisture being streamed away. And what's happening is this little low pressure down here is getting cut off. So the jet stream was going to carry this away, but now it's starting to move out as the high cuts it off. So the flow gets cut off and it starts lifting away. And then this gets left behind, and then you have basically a stalled frontal boundary, you have divergence, you have mass moving away from the low aloft, and then that creates the low pressure right here. And this little storm is going to start getting spun up here over the next couple of days. Well, as that happens, this high is going to quickly migrate off to the east, and then the high sets up like this in the coming days, and this little low is going to get caught by it, and it's going to be forced back to the west towards Florida. And as it does so, it should have some window to develop here north of the Bahamas before it makes it to the Sunshine State sometime late this week coming up. Which means Florida could be looking at some potential tropical impacts. Now, let's not get too ahead of ourselves because this is a very early season storm. It is in a marginal environment. It's going to have a pretty strong high pressure aloft, which is going to kind of keep that outflow from being able to really get going. And we don't see the conditions that we need for a strong, hurricane this time of year. But we can't rule out some direct impacts. Let's talk through the models real quick. We're going to start with the European model. We're here Wednesday this week, early Wednesday morning. European model does show a closed or maybe an open trough here to the north of the Bahamas. On this model, this would not be a very strong storm, maybe a weak depression or maybe just an unorganized potential tropical cyclone. Whereas the GFS around the same time, we go back a day ahead, it's 12Z. So the GFS, as usual, has a little bit more of a poleward bias and it has a stronger storm, which is a common model trend. So the GFS shows what looks like a tropical storm of some kind, 40, maybe 50 miles an hour. Where the European at the same time just shows more of an open trough or a more tropical depression-like storm. And both of these do generally move off to the west to northwest. As we go into Thursday and Friday, the European spins this up as it gets into Florida, and it makes landfall somewhere near Jacksonville, actually, going into late Thursday, early Friday. But I would caution to remind us that this kind of setup with a strong high pressure to the north, the most impacts will be to the north of where the low makes landfall because that's where your pressure gradient is tightest. So your difference in low and high pressure, that's where our wind blows the strongest. So the biggest waves and impacts and winds very well might be to the north of where this system makes landfall. GFS kind of shows a similar story, but it drives a little more straight into Florida, more like Central Florida, Space Coast kind of area, maybe even a little bit further south than that towards Lake Okeechobee potentially. But again, same principle applies if your low pressure makes landfall in Central Florida, although if we're talking about an actual organized system, then we will have some direct tropical storm impacts, but there could be some very strong winds to the north of where this makes landfall. This model illustrates it a little bit better. Again, European model on pivotal weather instead. In a little bit more zoomed in fashion, you can see this is just a general wind speed probability map. All these pinks and purples indicating those tropical storm force, or at least close to tropical storm force winds in a broad sector, but the low pressure center down here. So where your low might not be where your strongest winds are because your high is over here, so your winds are being funneled between these two pressure systems. So this could be a big southeast wind event, not just for Florida, but for folks in Georgia, South Carolina, etc. And the highest wind speeds could be well to the north, and the heaviest rainfall also could be to the north. So we're looking at an early season kind of sloppy tropical system, tropical storm, and that probably has some higher end ceiling towards the high end tropical storm, like what the GFS shows us here is a little bit more organized and developed system. We can check the pressure on it and see what it's calling here, if it's even going to do that, which doesn't look like it really wants to. Yeah, kind of the same story here. See if we can get it. Yeah, well, it's not showing it very strong. It's showing about 1,000 millibars, maybe 990s. Not terribly strong, but some organization to it. It is going to have plenty of warm water to work with. 27, 28 degrees Celsius. That's low to mid 80s. That's plenty of warm water to work with. Not scalding hot, but warm enough to get the job done. And upper level wind shear does not look terrible as we go into Wednesday, Thursday. I'll move us out to about that time frame here, which is late Wednesday night. Our low pressure is somewhere here north of the Bahamas, and it's got a little pocket. Our trough's off to the west or to the east of it, so it's got a little outflow, and it's got just enough room right here where the big high over Texas is not shearing it, but it's also not getting sheared by the trough either. So it'll have a window where the wind shear is not terrible over decently warm water. You've got a potential for something here. But again, Ensemble's not showing a ton with this. GFS Ensemble data coming in. And yeah, it definitely shows a landfall somewhere Florida or Georgia. But I mean, most of the models are only showing a low-grade tropical storm. This is 40, 50 max knots. So, 45, 55 miles an hour. That's all in the GFS, which would be the stronger model. European model showing it even weaker, more borderline tropical depression to tropical storm. So, again, the bottom line here, not looking at anything massively strong right now. I mean, we will have to watch this carefully. If it slows down a little bit, things change a little bit. But if the system over the Gulf gets strong enough, it might have some carry-on impacts to where this storm maybe isn't as strong from the outflow from it. So we'll see how that plays out. But if you're in Florida, I mean, the bottom line here is, yes, you could have some tropical impacts later this week. I would expect rainfall totals to come up. They're not forecast very high right now. They will likely come up. Could have some pretty gusty winds, especially at the coast. And we could be dealing with some kind of tropical storm late this week. But what we could see, a little too early to call. Wouldn't worry about it yet. Just be prepared, as you should be. It's that time of year. And just keep an eye on it. We'll be keeping an eye on the forecast, and we'll see how this plays out. But you've got about a good 5 to 7 days on this one. The impacts don't look like we're going to be talking about them until Friday, maybe even Saturday next week. GFS is a little bit faster, showing it maybe Thursday afternoon. So that Thursday-Friday window is probably when our impacts are going to be felt. So we'll be talking about it around then. But we'll have continuous updates throughout the week on it. We'll probably have a video most days. And we're just going to keep an eye on it and see how it goes. Until then, guys, that's all I got for you. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.